You would think Rand Paul, the great libertarian hope, would be a little bit different. But I have a clip here of Rand Paul, who's throwing his support behind Kim Davis as well. I want you to watch this clip if I can get this up. And I want you guys on the radio, of course, to listen to this clip from Rand Paul as he discussed on CNN his support for Kim Davis.
Well, I think it's absurd to put someone in jail for exercising their religious liberty. If you want to convince people that same-sex marriage is something that's acceptable, I would say try to persuade people. But, if we're going to use the federal government and we're going to get involved in every state, locality, what's going to happen? It's going to harden people's resolve on this issue. There'll be no open-mindedness on this. I think there's a lot of different ways around this that don't lead to conflict, that lead to more time when people can try to persuade others of their opinion on what marriage should be. But I think this is a real mistake. And even those on the other side of the issue, those who want to support a new definition for marriage, I think it sets their movement back because it's seen as that the federal government's going to come in with bully force and here even with police power and incarcerate people who disagree or who still believe in the traditional notion of marriage.
That's his first take. I have two clips from Rand Paul. It's funny how Republicans, and I'm going to use Republicans here because they are the ones who are coming to her rescue. I don't see any Democrats. Kim Davis may be a registered Democrat, right? But there are no Democrats, progressives, who are coming to this woman's rescue because she does not need rescuing. She needs to sit her behind in jail. OK, so it is a conservative evangelical position that this is all about. Right. So Republican candidates, Marco Rubio came out in support of it. Rand Paul here is talking about the federal government being a bully, using the police force. It's funny to me how Republicans are all about law and order up until that law and order is being used on them. They're quite okay with the police use of force, overreach in the African-American community, racial profiling. They're okay because that goes underneath the auspices of law and order. They're all about law and order in that regard. But now that law and order is being applied to Kim Davis and her zealotry and her not only zealotry, but her bigotry and hypocrisy. That's the word I'm looking for. When the federal government and law and order is being applied to her hypocrisy, all of a sudden the government is a bully. And the way that Rand Paul is trying to thread the nuance of his libertarian views in this conversation is that he feels like as though this is something that the federal government should not be involved with. And the federal government is coming in and being too abusive. And the federal government is coming in and overreaching in a situation that should only be handled by the state. And then I was reading an article, briefly skimming an article from this right-wing site, and the clip is in the link, the Conservative Review or something like that, and I'll share a screenshot from it. But I was reading it, and he traces this overreach, particularly by quote-unquote overreach, particularly by the Supreme Court, back 50 years. Right. And he's saying that we have for the last 50 years been dealing with a court who goes underneath the premises of their rulings having the force of law. And so they're lamenting the fact that the federal government has the ability to get involved with the state level when the state does not want to abide by the Constitution or legislation or court rulings. And it reminded me 50 years ago, like what happened 50 years ago? Not quite 50 years ago. We're about 61 years removed from it. But this harkens right back to the same people who did not want to integrate the school system, the George Wallaces of the world, who felt that the federal government had no right to come and get involved in their state and local business, and that they did not have to acquiesce to the Brown versus the Board of Education 1954 decision. So they've been lamenting this throughout American history, particularly in the 20th century, where they wanted to be able on the state level to run their state without regard to federal law and federal regulation. And matter of fact, it goes all the way back to the abolition of slavery and the 14th Amendment. There's still a large strand of thought in the Republican base and conservatism in general, wherever conservatism finds itself, because Kim Davis is a conservative, but she finds herself in the Democratic Party. It's always about that conservative mindset. It goes all the way back to them not wanting to have to abide by the 14th Amendment. And so Rand Paul represents this position where the federal government needs to not get involved and force the state government to abide by the Constitution, except for when the Constitution is convenient for them. But whenever the Constitution is inconvenient, then the federal government, oh no, the federal government shouldn't get involved. The federal government is a bully. You know, George Wallace standing on the court, standing on the steps of the university in Alabama, saying that the federal government, he's not going to allow them to force him to allow the people to come in and integrate the schools, right? This is the same story just 60 years later. The same exact story, same exact excuse, the same ideology that wants to be able to control its little fiefdom, its state, without any regard to federal regulations that conflict with their ideology. And they are totally 100% in love with the Constitution when it helps their ideology. In other words, they want America to only serve them. And they do not want America to serve anyone else. That is the bottom line of this of many of our conversations with regard to race, with regard to same-sex marriage, with regard to progressivism in general. Progressivism says that we are going to extend the same liberties that we have to everyone else. Conservatism says, well, no, you don't get that. This is, the federal government shouldn't get involved in that. Let the states decide. And these conservative, these backwards mentality people in the states are always going to opt on the side of bigotry because anything else is going to make them uncomfortable. And you would have to, God forbid, you would actually have to sign a marriage certificate, a secular license, and grant secular rights to people based on legislation, not based on the Bible. God forbid you would have to actually extend rights to people with whom you disagree.